And then I think welcome 1. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll get started. Thanks for coming to our session today. So today is question banks and quizzes in Moodle. And I know a few of you have already been kind of started and poking around. And really it's just kind of giving you some tips and tricks of ways that, again, setting things up the right way at the beginning will help you later on. So really is kind of the outcome of what I want to show you. And really that's with a lot of these sessions, it's if you do some of the planning and the initial setup right from the beginning, it makes it way easier. You can use, like Moodle is fairly user-friendly, you can kind of work your way through it and figure weird things out, but having that initial setting and preparation definitely will help you further on down the road. All right, so, and again, I will share I have a PowerPoint and then I have a Word document that has kind of like step-by-step instructions. So I will share both of those with you after we're done today, so that you can have access to those too. Okay, so just like when we talked about in the very first session about planning your course in Moodle, the same thing, do your assessment instruments early. And really your assessment instruments should almost be what you do before you even plan out your lectures and your PowerPoints, is once you know the outcomes of what your course is, so if you have a competency profile that you're given for your course, or if you're using apprenticeship materials and you have that already laid out for you, once you know that students are required to define this, describe this, explain this, create this, then think of, okay, how am I going to assess that? And then, okay, I know what the assessment tool is going to be, then how am I going to teach it so that they can do that assessment piece? So really don't just leave your questions, your multiple choice, your assignments, all of that till the end. It's better to really figure out what are your objectives, which are usually given anyways, and then once you have those, figure out your assessments. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all the way down to, I'm going to give 12 multiple choice questions. It's just like, okay, for this objective, I'm going to assess on multiple choice, true and false matching. But this objective is a little bit higher level thinking. I want them to get into maybe doing some sort of a writing or an analysis or an evaluation or comparing things together, which will be a little bit more of an involved assignment. So you can kind of think of what kinds of assignments, and as the semester goes on, then you can get into the details of writing the questions, figuring out how many, that sort of thing. So really that's what this slide is talking about, is figure out what your assessment instruments are going to be, then do the instructional strategies and the actual materials. So here are some questions that you can keep in mind. What do you want your students to accomplish are the outcomes. How will they show they have learned it is really the assessment, because really that's what assessment is the student showing you that they have learned what you wanted them to learn, and then how are you going to teach it. This is called backwards design. If you wanted to ever Google educational backwards design, this is what a lot of you'll find blogs and videos and stuff, people talking about this. This is ultimately what they will have, are those 3 questions. Okay, so like I said before, when you're planning out your course, do a lot of it, and we've actually figured out a very slick way, and I do have to give props to Greg because he figured it out himself too, how to do questions in Word, and then you can just import them into Moodle. You don't have to do it question by question. You can create a Word document with all of your questions in it and then just import them in. And I'll get into the technical part of that. This, first of all, is just trying to think of what are the quiz questions I want to ask. And we're focusing on quiz questions today. We'll do assignments later. But quizzes are really where you can ask things like multiple choice questions, true and false, matching, mathematical questions. And you can also ask more open-ended. You can do short answer and essay. Short answer, Moodle will try to mark for you, so the student basically has to type the answer in exactly how you set it up. If they spell it wrong, it'll mark it wrong. You may have accepted it as being right if you're okay with spelling mistakes. So then there's an essay question that is entirely open-ended. Moodle just waits for you to mark those. So it's there's lots of options, and we'll get into that here in a minute too. But really, you want to make sure your questions ultimately always tie back to those objectives or those competencies that you want your students to reach. And when you're doing multiple choice questions, you want to you don't want to make it easy for them to guess. Making a really good multiple choice question is actually very difficult, because you need to come up with, so there's obviously the answer, and then you have to have 3 other answers that are possible but still incorrect. It's easy to come up with 3 completely off the wall. Like, you've probably seen bad multiple choice questions where it's easy to tell the right answer because it's either way longer or it's way shorter or it's worded different, or like you want to try to make your 4 options similar in length, similar in style, similarities between them, but one is still right compared to the 3 others. So, and again, I've given you, and you'll see later on, I've given you some links to some articles and some blogs about some tips about writing good multiple choice questions. And you can do multiple choice questions that are beyond just the, what's the definition of this word, kinds of just that basic level of thinking. You can ask them, like give them a little bit of a scenario, so maybe there's a little bit of a case study or a bit of a story to go with it, and then you might have 3 or 4 or 5 questions that go with that. And you can ask them questions like to compare things within multiple choice. Like just don't, again, it does take a lot of work, and it kind of takes that, you really have to think about what are the options and how can I ask this question, how can I phrase it, but it is possible to get multiple choice questions at that higher level. And there are those different domains, cognitive, affective, psychomotor, when you are doing assessments. Cognitive is usually that's the one we would think of most, is what have they learned, what's their cognitive ability, what is the stuff that's stuck in their brains. Affective is more, what are their opinions, what are their ideas, they create something. And then psychomotor is the actual hands-on physical part. So the courses that the 4 of you teach are definitely very psychomotor. They're definitely hands-on, creating, building things. Other courses have a much more a more involved cognitive end. There's not as much psychomotor. So definitely different content lends itself to different kinds of assessments. And testing your questions. In Moodle, it's great that you can go in and preview them and try them as a student. It will mark them for you. It doesn't count it as an attempt in the gradebook, but you can see if you got them all right, and hopefully you would as the instructor in the course. But you could also ask someone in, maybe another instructor, to go through them for you, try them out. Generally, the time it takes you to do a quiz or a test, double it for your students is the kind of the rough rule that I've ever heard, that if it takes you 20 minutes to do it, it will probably take your students 40 minutes to complete it. So it's a good thing to keep in mind as you go through it. Try out your quiz, time it, and see how long it actually takes. And again, try to do as much of this as you can. You can do it in Word, like I said, and I'll show you how you can import it in. But doing it question by question in Moodle, you may lose some of that bigger picture of what were the overall competencies I was trying to reach. What were those goals that I want my students to get out of this assignment? So doing as much of that planning ahead of time will definitely help before you get bogged into the question 1, question 2, question 3 creation in Moodle. Okay, so I will send this to you. I found some pretty good resources on question writing, and again, and one thing I hope that you get out of all of these Moodle, and we hope the Google sessions, is not to feel like you have to come to the workshop and only what I show you is good stuff. Google it. Just Google, how do I write good multiple choice questions? How do I write good true and false questions? You're going to find tons of stuff out there, videos, blogs, websites, articles. There's lots out there. So that's really, I have to admit, all I did was ask the questions when I Googled it, and then I tried to sort out some good ones for you. The top one isn't always the best one when you're doing your searching, but it's a place to start, and then just kind of go from there. So just remember that you don't have to go by the links I give you. Please remember that you can, and really Google, now it works great, even just asking the question. Like you can type right in, how do I do this? And it is usually pretty good at searching by questions. So. Okay, so the quiz function itself, now Moodle, it's called a quiz, but it doesn't have to function just as a quiz. What quiz means in Moodle language is that it's questions that, they're individual questions that generally Moodle can mark for you. But you can use it as your typical quiz or exam, 0.5 on the list. But there's other options you can use with it. A common thing we see in some programs are chapter checks or self-checks questions, where you can make it worth nothing. The students, it doesn't show up in the grade book, it's given a weighting of 0. But it's still useful information because the student can then do the questions, get some results, get some feedback, like, oh, I bombed that quiz, or oh, I did pretty good on that. It gives them an idea for the actual assignments and quizzes and the tests that are coming up that are then actually have some value. So you may want to give very similar questions. You may want to tell your students that if you do the self-check, those questions may be repeated again in the one that actually counts. You can build feedback into these where students then can see that, oh, you might want to put something in the question and their response. If they pick a certain response, you can say, oh, you're close, but you did this, 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 and wrong. So you can actually build that feedback in. The simplest feedback with the quiz function is that it just shows you their grade. So students can see they got a 75%, and they can see which ones they got right, which ones they got wrong. So, and there's different levels of how much you share with your students as well in that feedback. Some instructors, so just a self-check, make it worth nothing, but they see the feedback, they get the mark. Some instructors actually use them as assignments. So they've built in matching questions, multiple choice, but they count it as an assignment because they want to use the benefit of Moodle marking it for them. If they have 50 students in the class, where maybe it's an open book activity, you're not, because usually a quiz, we kind of think of it as you sit by yourself, you don't work with anybody else. If it's more of an assignment where it's open book, they can work together, it's more collaborative, then maybe you want to classify that as an assignment rather than as a quiz. But they're still doing the same kinds of questions. Test practice, kind of, it's similar to that self-check idea. You might want to give them the option of giving them some questions ahead of time, especially with Moodle. The first time they go in to do a quiz, you're going to run into students like, I don't know where to click, I don't know how this works. If you give them some of those practice ahead of time, then when they actually go in to write their quiz, the one that actually counts, then they don't have to worry about those technology issues. Then you can also use it for the data gathering or feedback function. Now I have to admit I made this PowerPoint the last time I taught this, and I would probably do more with Google now with the feedback function, where I would maybe do a Google form or something if I was just asking for feedback from the students. But you could use, like with the self-checks and the assignments and the test practice, you can use that data to find out what are good questions, what are bad questions. So you can kind of use the data you can gather from the quizzes themselves, but if you're just asking the students kind of like a survey, maybe the quiz isn't the best place for that now. You may want to try something more in Google, but there's definitely data you can collect from all these questions to kind of give you an idea of maybe what areas students are struggling in and what areas they're doing better in. And when I send you this PowerPoint, you'll see there's links down at the bottom. These link directly to a page that's talking about these options. So, all right, so I think this is just about the end of my PowerPoint part, but I do want to go into Moodle now and show you some more of the tech end of this, how to set all of this up. And like really the question bank, if you do it right from the beginning, then it will help much. It definitely will be much easier later on to then use those questions in quizzes. So how Moodle works is there's the question bank part where your questions live in just like a bank. It's an organized way of categorizing your questions. Then from there you pull those into the quizzes that you want your students to write. It's the quiz where they see the question, but on your end the questions live within the categories and within the question bank. So again, I've given you lots of links. I will send those to you. You can use those. And I grabbed all of these. Whenever you're on a page in Moodle, remember that you have that Moodle Docs for this page, always at the bottom. Clicking on that is your help. For wherever you are in Moodle, look for that link at the very bottom, and that's where I took all of these Moodle Docs links on this page. Okay, any questions so far? All right. So if you have Moodle open, if you can go into that, and I'm going to just use one of my own kind of sandbox courses. So if you have one of those that you want to use, or if you have an existing course that you would like to use, please feel free to, if you want to follow along or if you want to watch, that's fine too, you can do that. So if you do end up creating questions within a quiz, if you go and if we turn our editing on, and you'll see if I scroll down to one of these topics, and let's say in here, add an activity or resource, I go in, I create a quiz, I add that, and I name it, and I do all of this, and then I go in and create questions. It's still going to work, but then you've lost the option of using those questions in other quizzes. So question banks then allow you that you could use questions maybe in a practice quiz. You could then take those questions and maybe use them in an exam somewhere, maybe in a final exam if you want to give your students the benefit of seeing questions multiple times. If you create them within a quiz itself, they only really live there. We can help you pull them out, but it is much easier if you do the initial setup in the categories first. So before we get into the actual quiz setup, I'm going to go out of this. And in your settings block, you'll see there's a question bank. So because this is in the settings block, it's not tied to any particular quiz. It's right kind of on the main part of your course. It's under course administration. That's where we're going to go first. Make sure So we're going to click on question bank. Now it defaults to questions. But really where you need to start first is categories. Now I have to admit this is a big mess because I've just pulled question banks from multiple courses so that I have some questions to work with. If you really want to try to not make it look quite this messy, but you can, as you create categories, and that would always be your first step, is to then, now you can either organize your categories, you can call them quiz number 1, quiz number 2, quiz number 3, or you can make your categories by topics. So perhaps Elizabeth, you might have like your turf identification and maybe turf management, like different kinds of topics that you might cover in your course. You might want to create categories for those for your questions. Or you can say, okay, no, I'm only ever going to use these questions in quiz number 1. I want to call that category quiz number 1. So there's different ways. Again, try to figure out what's the most logical way to organize and sort out your questions. So you probably have some defaults. You may have one for like a course shell. You might have one for the course itself. You might have one for the category that your course is in. You want to try to kind of work within just the course level. Down at the bottom, you can then decide, is it a subcategory of an existing one, or is this kind of a top level category? And again, you can kind of figure out where it fits in best. So if I do a top, and then I call this simple category, add the category, it should, somewhere, there it is, sample category. It's at the top level, so it's not and I know these ones, like question bank, module 1 quiz, 2 quiz, these ones I know are subcategories of this default for land documentation because they're indented in. If I decide to ever change the organization of my categories, I can by changing these arrows. If I click this one over, you can see it's going to move to top level. If I want to change the order of them, I can move things down, move them up, make subcategories. There's lots of ways you can do that. If I decide to delete a category, it does not delete the questions. It only deletes that kind of envelope I've put them in. So if you actually want to get rid of questions themselves, you have to go into the questions and delete them there. This is just how you've decided to sort them and organize them. The number behind the name is how many questions there are in that category. So again, just however it logically makes sense for your content, that's how you can organize these. Once you have other top levels, you can then delete these defaults. But if it is the only top level and everything else is sub, it won't let you delete the defaults that come created with your course. So just if you have anything else at the same level, then you can clean out those defaults if you don't want them. Okay, so that would be your first step, is to make your categories. Then once you have your categories set up, then you can go back to questions. And this is where, now if you didn't have them already created in a Word document, you can do it question by question at this point. So again, make sure you're always in the category. You can move them later, but again, it's easier if you just make sure right off the top. So I know that I want to put this question in my sample category bank. And then from here, I can create new questions. So again, this is if I don't have them in a place where I could import them in. So you can create your own quiz questions in a Word document, import them in. Or if you know another instructor has created a question bank that you want to use, you can get them to export it and then import it into you can share questions that way with other instructors. But if this is where you're creating questions right from scratch, you would do it this way. So on this screen, you get the options of different kinds of questions. You can do calculated questions. So that would be where all the students would do the same mathematical steps, but you would say, okay, say the formula is x plus y equals the answer. You would say, when you set up the question, x can be any number between 0 and 5, and y can be any number from 0 to 10. So when I see it, I might see 1 plus 7. When you see it, you might see 2 plus 4.
So they can't cheat off each other.
Exactly. So in the end, we're doing the same mathematical calculation, but my numbers are different than your numbers. So, but again, it's a little bit of a setup at the beginning, and you may want to try some of these out, preview them, make sure they work properly, but you can do, but then all the marking's done for you. So again, it's that, do I have time now to set all this up, and then I don't have to mark? Or am I going to just quickly do it on Word, hand it out to the students, and then I have to mark 50 copies of these questions over and over again? So where do I want to spend my time is kind of what you have to figure out when you're doing these. So calculated simple is probably the best one to choose with that option. If you just had a mathematical calculation, you put the ranges in of what numbers would be applicable in the calculation, then the students plug in the answer. You can decide how many decimal points, if you'll accept it rounded, all that is built into that. Essay would be the type of question where Moodle makes no attempt to try to mark it. So don't feel like the students actually have to write an essay. The students could write a sentence answer. It doesn't have to be a full essay. It just means that Moodle, there's no answer tied to this question. You have to manually go in and mark them all. The students also, if there's any essay questions in their quiz, they don't see how they did on the other questions until you go in and mark it. So they don't see that they got a 75% on just the multiple choice section. It says it's waiting to be marked. So they don't get their overall final mark until you go in and manually mark those essay questions. So something to keep in mind. Matching, multiple choice, numerical are just like they sound. Numerical, that would be similar to a calculated, but every student would do the same mathematical. It just gives them the option to type numbers in, that's all. And short answer and true and false are probably, those would be the top ones that we see. But again, short answer, you can build it in so that you accept kind of some wild cards, like as long as there's one word out of the whole sentence is what you're looking for, but it's not foolproof. If they spell that word wrong, Moodle would mark it wrong, even though you may accept it as being right. So I would suggest if you do short answers that you still go in and double check to make sure that they're marked correctly.
Can you give multiple, like, for example, like I might do an ID scenario and the right answer is co-pretensis, right? But you have to spell pretensis right. Can I just put like 2 or 3 acceptable spellings of pretensis?
I think, yes. I think, and there, yeah, you can do, it's not just one answer and that's it. Like you can say this or this or this are the answers. Okay. So, but then you would have to think, okay, what are the common ways it's misspelled? And make sure you put in all the possible options. And they'll probably still spell it wrong in a way that you didn't think they would spell it wrong. Yeah.
That's the best way to do it, is just get a database or whatever of how many wrong answers and how they're spelled. That's how I do it. And then when you do it for the next term or whatever, you fix it up.
Oh,
that
right.
goes in there.
Like you just take.
Yeah, because they'll come up with spelling that you don't even think of.
Yeah. And then you have to decide, is spelling really important? And you want it marked wrong if they spell it wrong, or if they flip 2 letters, close enough, I'll accept it. So, yeah. Again, it's that initial kind of planning of what would you, but then by doing it here, you've already kind of set up your not necessarily a rubric, but you've set up your answer key of what your expectations are of how you're going to mark it if you put it into here. Then there's no, really the students can't come back and argue because you said, nope, these are the answers I accepted. That's what got marked right and wrong. So then there's no ambiguity that you marked this student right and this one wrong and their spelling is closer than theirs. You could just say, no, this is how I set it up, and then Moodle did all the marking.
Is it possible to, for them to, like, they can flip back and forth through their questions too? Hey?
Yes.
So
yeah.
For example, you could have a matching one where it's like, match this Latin to this English, and then you can just say at the very beginning, look guys, spelling matters. Look at the spelling in the other question,
right,
or something like.
Yeah, and I'll show you how you can do that. You can make it so they have to answer question 1 before question 2 before question 3, or they can jump around and do it in whatever order they want. Yeah. Okay, so once you have the type of question picked, so let's say we pick multiple choice, go next, It's in the category I want. Then I get a few options. Now, the question name is how you're going to see the questions when you decide to pull them into your quiz. So you may want to give it, I would recommend giving it a very short, easy way to tell question 1 apart from question 2 apart from question 3. You won't see a lot of this text. You only see about 5 or 6 characters when you actually pull up your list. This cuts off. So even though you might give it a big long name, you might want to give it something a little bit shorter. Quite often we'll see instructors come up with some sort of code like quiz 1 number 1, quiz 1 number 2, quiz 1 number 3, and then that matches what they have in another document, like a Word document. But again, if you've already done it in Word, you don't have to do it here. So just how are you going to know how question 1 is different from question 2? Like, don't call them all turf, 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 because then you won't, when you go to pull them in, you won't know the difference between all of them because they all have the same course name, the question name. So somehow that's short and easy to tell without having to go into the question again, what the question actually is.
Do they see the question name?
No, they don't. All they see is the question text. So then you could just repeat it. So maybe the first line of your question, what is the definition of this word? You might put that as the question name. What is the definition? But you might not see all of it when you actually get into your quiz when you create it. So, so the question text then is what are you actually going to ask your students? So I'm going to call this one question 1. So the question text becomes what do you actually ask them. The default mark, chances are multiple choice, you're just going to make them all worth 1. Now you can have the option to have multiple answers as being the right answer, but to make it easier for the marking and the calculating, I would probably just leave it with a multiple choice where just one of them is right. Then you don't have to worry about trying to get it all to add up properly. Shuffling the choices is if you would want student A and student B to see their A, B, C, D all mixed up. If you're doing a question that has all of the above, I would suggest turning that off so that all of the above stays as probably your D option in your multiple choice question. Number of the choices, we just usually leave it as the default. Then you put in your answers. So choice 1, choice 2, 3, 4. If you want to have more, that gives you 5. You can add more blanks if you want to. Whatever one is the right one, you have to show that by going to the grade and picking that it's worth 100%. So if you had decided there was multiple answers, you could then say, okay, question 1, so maybe I have 2 right answers out of the choice of 5 things. So if they pick this one, they'll get half the mark, and then if they pick this one, they'll get the other half of the mark. But they have to get both right to get 100%. So you have to either make all of the choices, the right answers add up to 100, or just pick one and make it out of 100. That would probably be my suggestion for doing that, just to keep track of, so that you don't lose track of how much all these are worth. Then you can give feedback down here at the bottom. So if it's correct, you can say, good job, you know what you're doing. If they have it wrong, you might say, well, you might want to refer back to page 12 of your textbook. Please reread that section. That's where you'll find the answer. Especially if it's a self-check or you're giving them some practice, you may want to build some of that feedback into it. So then they know, okay, I got it wrong, but where do I go to get it right so that I can fix this by the time I actually do it when it counts for something. So you can take advantage of this feedback. Again, it's a little bit of work, but then you're not having to go through every person's quiz and writing the same comments on all of the time. I forgot to mention if we're recording these sessions again, so. You can also do within the quiz itself where they get multiple tries to write the questions. If you do decide to use that, then they would lose. So after the 3rd attempt, if they're worth, every time they get an incorrect try, they would lose 33% of their mark. That's what that is referring to there. So if you just leave it, it's actually within the settings of the whole quiz is what turns it on. So you can just leave that. You can ignore it. You can give them hints. Again, that's within the settings of the quiz. If you decide to give them multiple tries to try the questions, then those can come up. But really what you need to do is you need to have the question name, what is the question the students are doing, and then which is the right one. If you don't have one picked, it will say, if you find that you come down here and you hit Save Changes and nothing happens, chances are if you scroll back up, you're going to see something up here highlighted in red saying one answer must be chosen as correct, or it flags it for you. It doesn't let you put in an answer. It doesn't let you create questions without putting in at least one right answer. So we've had requests from instructors saying, well, just put all the questions in and I'll go in later and put all the right answers in, but we can't. You can't save a question unless you put one of them as, you have to put a right answer in before it will save the whole thing. All right, so any questions on multiple choice? So the first time if you go into it, it can be a little clunky looking, just how choice 1, choice 2, and so on. But the 4 options of what you would want the students to see, put one of those as choice 1, one of those is 2, choice 3, and choice 4, and then whatever one is the correct one, give it the grade of 100%.
And they don't see the feedback until after they've answered the question,
yes,
obviously.
Exactly.
Until they finish the quiz or just the question?
It depends on how you set it up.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get into the quiz settings. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how you would do multiple choice. I'll just cancel that. If the other, like an essay, you just go in and type in. So you might have to go in and do these questions when you may have a bunch of multiple choice questions you created and you import those in, but it doesn't import in matching questions. It doesn't import in essay questions. It kind of works for true and false. You may want to create true and false right from scratch. So really the way I'm going to show you how to import from Word really only works for multiple choice. You will have to come into this if you have other kinds of questions you want the students to work on. So an essay question, again, how are you going to classify? What's the name? Make sure it's in the category that you want it to go in. The question then is write about a certain topic. What is your answer to this question? You would put that as the question text. Then here you might decide, well, that one's actually worth 10 marks because I'm looking for 10 things that I'm going to be marking out of. Then general feedback, again, is if you decide to turn that on, do they see that after they submit their quiz? Information for graders would be for you if you had like the points of what you'd be marking for. So you wanted to build an answer key in, you can put that information for, you can put it in the information for graders block, and then when you come back later to mark the question, you'll see their response, and then you'll see your information for graders right below it. So then you can compare. They're right on top of each other. You don't have to look back and forth between 2 other documents. Try to remember, oh, how did I mark this again? What was I marking it out of? You can actually build in right in this information for graders. I would put your rubric, like 2 marks for this, 1 mark for this, 3 marks for this, whatever you're marking, however you're going to mark it. Put that in right there. Then you'll see it on every time you mark every question. Well, that one's pretty simple. Matching, you can give them distractors as well in matching questions. So the question, you have to have at least 2 questions and 3 answers. So if you had, the question might be the actual definition, so you might write out definition 1 here, definition 2 here, then the actual term that goes with it, the word that it's defining, would be the answer. You could then have maybe 4 or 5 words that they could pick from. So you have to just, and it reminds you up here that you have to have at least 2 questions filled out, and then you can have at least 3 answers for the students to pick out of. And then how matching questions work in Moodle is it makes a drop-down little menu. So beside each definition, then there might be they click on the drop-down, and then they would see the list of the words. They'd pick the one that they'd want to use. So, and then again, you can give feedback. If you decide to do multiple tries, you can do that with the hints. And then true and false.
Sorry, how did you set it again so that they can't have multiple tries, or just leave it?
Just leave it in this, and then it's in the quiz itself. You decide in the quiz level.
Okay.
Yeah. And then true and false is just like it sounds. Put in the question name, what's the question text, and then put in that is this a true answer or a false? Like the question itself, was it true or was it false? And then again, you can give them feedback. So if they picked true and it was supposed to be false, you can say, oh, you're close, but you're wrong. So you can decide what feedback you want to give them there. And then I think in short answer, you will see that here it says you must provide at least one possible answers. Answers left blank will not be used. Like a little asterisk can be used as a wild card to match any characters. So if you would accept, like if you had ing or ed or s, like you were looking for just the root part of the word, you could put that and an asterisk on the end. So then you would accept any kind of way it would be spelt. So here you can give, this is where you can type in the 5 different ways you think the students are going to mark it wrong or spell it wrong. You could put in spelling option number 1, number 2, and then you could say, well, all of those I would accept as being technically right. I would say they're all 100%, as long as one of them is picked. But like you said, there's probably going to be, they're still going to come up with some way to spell it wrong. So you can then decide. So I would always suggest double check. So if you're going to double check, you might as well just do them as essay questions and then just mark them yourself. All right, so any questions on the types of questions that you can do? So I hope you're kind of seeing that it's called a quiz, but really you can ask very open-ended questions. It doesn't have to be just multiple choice, true and false. That's usually what we think of. That's our default when we think of a quiz. But you can have all essay questions and call it a quiz, and really it's an assignment. But you just decide to use the function of how this looks in Moodle. So it gives you lots of flexibility, lots of options that you can set up with that. All right, so once you have your question bank created, now your students need a place to actually write the quiz itself. So as you can see, nowhere in here have we actually set up a quiz. We haven't set up any dates yet. There's nowhere where the students go to write this. Students don't see the question bank when they log into Moodle. That's something just you as the instructor sees. So if we go back to the course, and I'll just use this. Where did that quiz go? I'll just use this quiz number 1. Actually, no, I'm going to make a new one. So let's say in this, I'm going to do it down here at the bottom. So in my topic 8 block, this is where I want the students to write a quiz. So I go into the add an activity or resource, and I find quiz. And quizzes always have this blue square with the green check marks. I know that's the icon that always goes with a quiz. So if you decide to use these as assignments and not quizzes, you may want to put in the name assignment whatever, like make sure your students are aware that you are marking this as an assignment. It goes in under the assignment category of their marks, not a quiz, just to make sure they know the difference. Because even though you might call it assignment, if you do it this way, it always has this little icon up here at the top. So we'll call this one, maybe this was, say block 8, we'll call this quiz number 8. If you want to give them a little bit of an introduction, maybe to say this is covering chapters 7 through 10 in your textbook, you can. You don't have to. The only things you have to fill in are when you see the red little asterisk and things in red. If you want it to show up on the course page, you can check that off so they'll see that right from the main page. They don't have to go into the quiz to see what's being covered or whatever information you've given them. This is where now you can give some parameters of when they can actually access the quiz. So when does it open? When does it close? Do they get a time limit? So they maybe only get 30 minutes to write the quiz once it starts. Oops. I got ahead of myself a little bit there. All right, so let's say I'm opening this quiz. I want it to start tomorrow. Maybe I have class tomorrow. And I want them to write it during class time, which is at 10 o'clock. So I might wait and have this open at 10:05, let them get into class, let them turn on their iPads or their computers, whatever they're using. And then I also want it to close during class at 11 o'clock. But as soon as they hit start, they're going to see a countdown of 30 minutes to write the quiz. So this, in the closing, what that really means is that let's say a student let the time run out, or maybe they waited until 10:35 and started this, and they're not going to get their full 30 minutes. When it hits that the quiz is closed, we highly recommend that it says when time expires, Open attempts are submitted automatically. So whatever the student has done, that is what counts. You can be tough and you can say, if time runs out and you haven't submitted it yet, too bad, I'm not counting it. You had to hit submit and you had to be watching your time. So you can decide, but we suggest that you do the open attempt. So whatever they've done, even if they haven't finished it, it at least counts that much. So, yes.
So I know that's very difficult to change a question while it's already been opened, right? Can you manipulate that? And let's say, you know, have one kid do it and just see how it goes as a test?
You could try it.
You know, and then you can fix up any of those that you haven't found, and then reset the time the next time.
Right, or you could maybe even go into here and just give them a longer time.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because you can't, if I got 30 kids that are writing it, they've got open time for a month or whatever.
Yes.
And if I find an error in there,
That's
I can't
right.
go back and do it.
No. So you could.
So, but could I assign it to the first one kid that goes in there one day and go through it, be my guinea pig, and then come back and then reassign it, fix that up and reassign it another time?
Yes. Yeah, or you can, so.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So you can go in and change these after the quiz.
Correct. But
there's always the risk of it remembering old information. It may kind of catch itself up trying to, because this is still HTML coding. Sometimes that coding gets stuck. It tries to go back to what you originally had. So what I would maybe suggest even doing is you can take a quiz and you can duplicate it, so that rather than going backwards, you're just making a copy of an existing course and then, or existing quiz or an assignment, and then moving forward with that one.
For that one.
Yes, and closing the other one.
Right, and that's actually something good for spelling stuff too that you can find out.
Yeah. So that might be the better way than rather than going backwards and trying to change things and making it move forward into the future.
No, that makes sense.
It might be better just to do it. And I can show you how you do that. Yeah.
No, I know.
So, and then you can, if you have your gradebook set up from what we talked about gradebook last week, you can then say, I want this to fall into my quiz category. You can decide how many attempts your students get. Now, if they get more than one attempt, this grading method opens up. A lot of instructors usually take the highest grade, but we have heard of some stories where students go in on their first attempt, look at all the questions, randomly just pick answers to see how they did. Then they'll go in and try it again, knowing all the questions, and then the students see this. They know if it's highest grade or if it's average grade. So to catch them from just going through the first time just to read all the questions and not even actually do it, you may want to put this in as average grade. So then they have to try. They actually have to attempt it the first time they go through it. So it would stop them from just using their first attempt as a, not cheating, but just looking at the questions really quickly.
They'll manipulate it
yes.
any way they can.
Yeah. So averaging it at least would penalize them for doing a 0 on the first attempt.
I've already had kids do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Question order. If you want them to do the same, now the edit screen is how you create, and that's the next step, is editing it and actually creating the questions in the quiz itself. If you want student A, student B, and student C to all write the exact same order of the questions, you would do as shown on the edit screen. But if you want, say you have 20 questions in your quiz and you don't care if student A sees them in a totally different order than student B compared to student C, they all write the same 20 questions, but just the order gets mixed up. If you're doing a quiz in a lab where students are all sitting side by side, you probably would want to shuffle these up so then they can't look over and, oh, you're on question 1 and I see that you've done the third one down. I'm going to steal that answer because their question 1 is different than your question 1. So, but if it's entirely open book, if they're doing this outside of class, maybe it doesn't matter as much. But shuffling it randomly still would, if students are working together, and we are seeing more and more instructors using quizzes as a collaborative thing done outside of class, shuffling it would still require, even though you're working together, they're doing different questions at different times. They wouldn't just be able to copy as easily. They would actually have to discuss different questions at different times. We suggest leaving, so every 5 questions as a new page, because then that way they'll do 5 questions and they almost kind of partially submit. It doesn't completely hand it in to be marked, but then it gives Moodle the chance to kind of remember those 5 questions and their answers. Do 5 more, submit those, it remembers those. If you do 20 questions all on one page, If the students are halfway done and they lose their computer connection, the power goes out, all those answers are gone, because Moodle has never had a chance to kind of remember them. By going from page to page to page, Moodle in the background will remember those students' answers. So you can do one question per page, but then they're having to do a new page for every question. It's probably a little bit quicker. We find 5 questions seems to work well. And navigation method is what you were talking about, Elizabeth, where you would have, if you want them to jump around. So free means they can do question 1, question 20, question 2, question 17. They can go wherever they want. Sequential means they have to do question 1 first, and then, or the questions on that page before they can go to the next page, and then they can't go back. Yes.
So you're saying if you put down on the navigation method, it'll be 5 questions, correct? It'll save that 5 questions. Do they not have to hit click and submit?
They do, but on the administrative end, like if you then had a student come to you and say, my power went out, or I lost my internet connection, I could go in and pull up their, like in our old college domain, yes, I could go in and see that they've attempted those questions but haven't submitted them yet. And you might even as an instructor be able to do that. We'd have to play around with it a little bit, but the student might not be able, you might have to do an override and let the student have another attempt or finish off what they've done, but at least it remembers it in the background.
Gotcha.
So
my class, I had a Moodle quiz today in my class. They, for whatever reason, everybody just went poof. They lost the connection.
Right.
And all they had to do was go back to the quiz.
And it was
let
all
them continue the attempt.
Right.
Except for one, I had to override.
Oh, okay.
But all the rest of them, and it had all their answers, because of course it was 60 questions, and
Right.
they were all worried they lost everything. But it showed everything
Okay,
up to
good.
that one page. Some of them lost 1 or 2 questions.
Right.
So that was it.
Okay, good. Yeah, because the whole internet went down here on campus today, I guess.
Yeah.
So that was right in your quiz.
Yeah, right in the middle of my quiz.
Yeah.
So if you choose sequential, they cannot go back?
I don't think so. They have to do page 1 and then page 2 and then page 3. So if you knew that it was a spelling kind of a question and you knew the answer was further ahead, you might not want them to be able to go back, because then they could take that spelling from it. So if it was a word that was used in another question, or if you didn't care, if you wanted, like, hey, like, let them see if they figure that out, that it's there, then you might want them to do free, and then they can jump around and go back and forth. So, and really, if it was a paper-based quiz, students can jump around all the time. So why not let them when it's this? So there's probably some reasons, but I would probably leave it as free. Shuffling within the questions, you might want to turn this off as no if you have any. Now that's like all the questions, do you want them shuffled up, the A, B, C, D within the question? If you have any that are more than the above, or all of the above, none of the above, you might want to turn that off. How questions behave, this is where, and we're still playing around with this, to be honest. It usually works. Sometimes we find there's the odd glitch. Deferred feedback is a typical quiz where you do 20 questions, you do all 20, hit submit, and then you get your mark. You can do adaptive mode, immediate feedback, interactive with multiple tries. They all have their own, they're all a little bit different. If you click on this little question mark, it will kind of help you what the difference is. You can then give students the option where they can do, they basically submit each question, like I do a question, submit it. Did I get it right? No, I get to go back and try again. So that's that multiple tries thing that it was talking about. We're still, if you want to try it, we can definitely help you out with it. Right off the top of my head, I honestly can't remember. We've tried all of these and we did find one that works the best. I'd have to go back and check which one it does work, but for the most part, we just suggest leave this as deferred feedback. Then it's a typical quiz where they do them all at once, hit submit, get their mark at the end.
Or manually graded if you're doing an essay.
Yes. This is now, this review options is where you can then get into the specifics of what the student sees when they're done their quiz. So during the attempt, you probably want them to, I don't think you don't really want them to see anything. But then after the attempt, do you want them to be able to see what, so the attempt is what answers they picked, whether it was right or not. So that would just show a check mark or an X. And then you could also show them what the right answer actually was. But if they did it at 10 in the morning and you had it open until midnight and other students weren't going to write it until 10 o'clock at night, you might not want the right answers floating around out there. because other students, oh, you already finished the quiz, can you log back in and show me all the right answers? You probably want to wait until the quiz is entirely closed before you start showing right answers. If you think there's any way that you might use this quiz question again in a later quiz or in a midterm or a final exam, you might not want the right answers ever going out until they write the final exam, perhaps. You might just want to show that, yeah, you got it right or wrong, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Or you may wait in class and then have a class discussion about, okay, what do you think the right answer should have been? You could use that in your class as well. So you can decide how much you want to let your students know when they hit that submit button. Probably the barest thing I would suggest is at least let them know how they did. Give them what their marks were, that at least they know they got a 90% or a 30%, like they know the mark of it. You may then decide if you're discussing these in class, if they mark it completely on their own. If you built feedback into your quiz questions, into the general feedback or specific feedback, you might as well let them see it if you built all that in. If you are doing a quiz in class and you want them to only do it in class, you might want them to have a password. So students might figure out, if you've put the link in Moodle, that, oh, I don't have to be in class to write the quiz, I can go home and write it. If you put a password in and you don't give the password out until they walk into the room, then it ensures that they're in the room. I guess they could still work around that and text it to their friend if their friend doesn't happen to be in class, but they could message it to them somehow. But at least it's a way of making sure that they're there, that they don't get the password until you talk to them face-to-face in class. Do you use the password at all?
No. I haven't.
No, you just have them.
Yeah, I usually hide the quiz until I walk into the classroom and then I open it.
Right.
And most of our classes are small enough, there's only 15.
Right.
So it's pretty easy to tell if anybody's missed.
Yeah. And then you would know, too, like if it's a small class and like you know Johnny didn't show up and then all of a sudden his quiz result is there, but is that a bad thing that he still did his quiz even though he didn't show up to class? Unless he had his book open and you didn't want it to be open book, then there's lots of variables, but you can decide how you want to deal with that. But that option is there. And if you do give them multiple attempts, you may want it so that they don't just read through it, hit submit, and then try again. You might say, well, no, I want to take a couple hours, read through your books, read through your materials, review the stuff again, and then come back and write the quiz. So you can enforce some delay between them. Browser security. We've had some instructors that they want to try to block that students can't then open other windows or other tabs to search for answers. This full screen pop-up with some JavaScript security does make it so that the quiz then, it completely covers all of the tabs until they hit submit. But there are some workarounds. There's some some keyboard shortcuts that you can type in that make that collapses it in a bit, and then they can see all the tabs if students know enough to work around it. So that's why it says some security. It's not foolproof. The Safe Exam browser, IT would have to come in and actually, it's a software program they'd have to load individually on a case-by-case basis on all of the computers, so we haven't gone that far yet. So usually we just leave the browser security as none. If you want to try this, you can, but again, it's not a 100% foolproof way. It does just make a pop-up that covers, so you can't see it, the black is covering on the screen, but it would cover up all those tabs and students wouldn't be able to open another tab until they hit submit.
What about on the iPad?
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work?
No. There's no security you can build in on the iPad. This is just on a computer. You can then give feedback for your quiz, so maybe between 100 and 90% you want to say, good job, way to go, you've got a good grasp of this. 89 to 90, maybe you want to say, pretty good, looks like you've got a good idea. So you can decide kind of where the grade boundaries are. So between this mark and this mark, whatever you type in the middle is what they would see. Between the next boundary is whatever you decide to show them. So that is the overall feedback. So when you look up here in the review options, you can see all those feedbacks. That's what those are referring to. So the specific feedback was specific to those questions. Overall feedback is this down here. And then if you decide to use groups, which we will talk about in a couple weeks coming up, you can decide that, okay, this group of students is writing this quiz, another group of students is writing a different quiz. You can make it so that groups can see it or they can't see the quiz. And then you would just save and return to course. Let's see if I have enough. So I'll save that. So, like you can see, quiz number 8, this is covering chapter 7 to 10 in your textbook, but nowhere have I done any questions yet. So the settings is just that initial setup. The last step now is to actually move the questions into your quiz itself. So to do that, I'm going to click on the quiz name. And then you can see all those things you set up, 2 attempts allowed, average grade, time limit. So the students will see all of this. But to actually put the questions in, now you have to go to Edit Quiz. And this is where, so over here on the side, I'm going to select the category. So let me say, I want to pick some questions from this one. So you can see now, depending, especially on the size of your screen, these were the question names. But I can maybe see 4, maybe 5 characters. So if I called it turf 1, turf 2, turf 3, I may lose all of those numbers, and then all I would see is turf, and there'd be no way to know which question is which. So this, I think now you probably see what I'm talking about, where you want, like all of these say public, public, public. I don't know what all that means anymore because all the rest of the descriptor is cut off. So try to think of a way to have a short way that easily defines or separates the questions of one from the other. Now, if you set up that Module A test questions, I know that all 55 questions I want to show up in my quiz, I can select all of them by using this little box up here at the top. I scroll down and I hit Add to Quiz. Or I might say, I want this one, I want this one, I want this one, and then I want those 4, and then I would add to quiz. Then I could pull up another category and pull 4 or 5 questions over, and another category and pull 4 or 5 questions over. So don't feel like you have to, I can only do one category in my quiz. I could pull from however many categories I want. You can also, in here, if you scroll down to the list of your categories, you can say add random questions. So if you have a big enough question bank, maybe you have a bank of like 50 questions, and you only want the students to write 20 of those, you can say add, let's say there's 55 in here, so I might say add 20. So as long as I know those questions are all fairly comparable, I could say out of this 55, write 20 of them. And that's what this is saying. I can also pick and say, no, I want for sure these 4 questions, add those. So I'm just going to add these ones. So let's say I knew these ones had to be in my quiz. There we go. And then the rest is random. Then I can do add 10 random questions, add to quiz. So now I'll see, where did those ones go? Oh, okay. Because I have shuffle questions set up, I don't know, they're not going to say this is for sure question 1, this is for sure question 2, 3, 4, because it's going to be random for the students. But I know for sure that this matched the correct term, the pressing tool, what does this stand for? I know for sure these 4 are going to be in there, and then it says random question, random question, random question. So you can kind of give different kinds of, like if you know everyone has to write the same 5, then from there on the rest can be random. Or you can do the entire quiz random, or you can do, you pick the specific questions you want. Now one thing before you would leave this screen that I would suggest doing is in the maximum grade, the default is always going to be 100 marks. But the total of marks the questions they can get is 24. So, and I'm going to show you what this looks like if you leave it as 100. So if I save this, then I know that for every question, the most they can get is 24 because the maximum number of marks is 24. I can now preview this. If I want to have a look and see what it looks like, I can actually try the questions itself. You can see now there's a clock over here on the side. So that's how the students see it. They see the time that's left. Matching questions look like this. You can see it's a drop-down option that they pick. True and false is just like it sounds, true and false. I can skip those questions if I want to. I can then jump around. I can do some more. Then when I'm done, finish the attempt. And the students see this as well. They're going to see answer saved, not yet answered, there must have been, I didn't finish that one. So they get that chance to double check before they hand it in. And then I can either go back or I can submit all and finish. Once it submits all and finishes, then as the instructor, I'm just going to jump around a little bit, I have a quiz. So now when students do the quiz, and you click on the link of the quiz, there's this attempts. So I can see one person has attempted my quiz. So this will only show up once as students actually do it. I click on this, and now I'm going to start to see all the students' names fill in, and I'm going to see how they did on question 1, question 2, question 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on. Even though I may have asked it to shuffle it up, question 1 refers to the question that I put in as the first question when I was editing it. So when I was pulling questions over and I said, put this one in as question 1, this one in as question 2, 3, 4, and so on, then those, so even though you may see a different question 1 than I do, Moodle will rearrange those in this page and put them all as question 1, all as question 2, all as, like it'll.
So you can see if people are consistently
Yes,
getting one wrong.
Exactly, yeah. So it resorts them all, so all of these people are the same answers, all of these were the same, and so on. Now, this is what I was talking about. How do I make a question out of 6.3 marks? That doesn't make any sense. What happened was, if we go back to edit the quiz, you will see the total of marks was 16. So it's basically taking 100, dividing it by 16, and you get that weird decimal. So if I put this back to 16, save it, and you'll see now that I have attempts in here, I can't change my questions. So that's what you were talking about, where once students write it and oh, there's a spelling mistake in this question, or I didn't put something in here right, you can't edit it once they've attempted it. So that may be something, and we can help you out with kind of adjusting marks if that is, if you have to throw a mark out, we can help you out with that. But you can't go in and now change the questions because it says, well, students have already started this, and to be fair, you can't change it from one student to the next. So now that I've saved this and made the maximum grade the same as the total of marks, I go back to my attempt, and now that makes more sense. Everything's out of a mark each. And now I can scroll over, I can see, and so this is not yet graded because I built in an essay question that requires grading. So now I click on that to see that student's response. What's the weather like today? Cold and windy but sunny. Like, yeah, that's the right answer. I click on here and I say that's out of a mark. Save it. And if I close this, and it should now, I may have to regrade this. There we go. So I did have to tell it that I was done. So I selected it, and then I said regrade it now that I've put in that mark for that written question.
You got to get that so the kids can see it. Otherwise,
yes,
they won't be able,
that's right.
Why.
Yeah. Okay. So this grade won't ever. It just kind of resets it or reloads it with whatever mark you have decided to put in over here. In this. This was my essay question, that last one.
So if you do have a question that has an error in it, now the test is done or whatever, and you found that there was an error or spelling, if you go in the question bank and correct that, will it automatically correct it in the quiz, or does that question have to be removed and then put back in?
You can edit. I think actually you can go in and edit, say, like the question text itself, if maybe there was a spelling mistake. It would just be if you had to change, like, oh no, from A to B was the right answer. That's the kinds of changes that Moodle wouldn't let you go in.
Even what if what if the test was closed already and say you got your
next
group was starting it?
Then
would
you can go,
automatically update into there. Okay, so you don't have to go through and manually remove the question.
No, no. It would be from then on, you could reuse that question after you fixed it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you could fix a spelling error?
I think you can in just
instead of having to copy and have to.
Yes, and you can't
change something.
You can't take out questions or add more questions too. That's really what it's not letting you do. You could go in and just edit the question through the question bank if there was a spelling mistake in, you made a typo in there, and it should let you do. It's just once students have, if student 1 has already done 20 questions and I forgot to add one, and you can't add more questions once that student has already submitted. Yeah. Okay, and then you can start to see kind of, it gives you some mark breakdowns. You can sort this by, and all these blue links across the top allow you to sort it. So if you want to see who put in alphabetical order, or if you want to see what was the fastest time compared to the slowest time, what was the highest grade compared to the lowest grade, you can do all of that. So by clicking on these blue, it's not going to do anything because I only have one student. My demo, she didn't do very good, 4.3 out of 16. But you can sort it by clicking on any of it. As soon as it's blue and it underlines when you hover over it, that usually means you're good to go. You can click on it. Okay, so that really is the gist of quizzes. One thing you may want to keep in mind is you can do overrides. So if you have been contacted by the Access Advisor that you have a certain student in your class that gets extra time, usually they get double time to write a quiz. Within the quiz itself, under quiz administration, you can do user overrides. So I would add an override. And you really only should do this if you have been given documentation from, it's Chris Bellamy here on campus is the Access Advisor. If a student just comes to you and says, oh, in high school I got extra time, well, we need documentation that they still have that accommodation here. And they can, like if students did have extra time in high school, they can apply for those accommodations here as well, but we just can't take their word for it that they had extra time when they were in high school. So, but once it's been confirmed the student is allowed extra time, you just add user override, click on find the student, and then you would just probably give the time limit. It may still be the same amount of, like, it opens and closes at the same time, but they get 30 minutes instead of the 10 that everybody else got. So that's an easy way to do it, to give those students that extra amount of time so that when that student logs in, their clock is different than everybody else's. Okay. I will send you the instructions. I don't think we'll go over it tonight. I'm running a little late. Sorry. There's so much to talk about. I could talk about Moodle and Google for hours. In the question bank, there is this import, and that is where you can bring in, and it's this Aiken format, and then you can choose a file and bring in your Word document. You actually have to make sure it is formatted correctly and that it's actually a text file, so you have to take your Word doc and save it as a text file and make sure you have the formatting all correctly. I will send you a link for that will walk you through the instructions of how to do that, but then you just make sure it's Aiken format, pick which category you want those questions to be dropped into, and then choose the file and bring it in. So
it's very picky.
Yes.
One space.
That's right.
Gets all screwed up.
Yeah. So I will send you those specific instructions once you get to that point, but yeah. And then we can also, from Moodle, you can export. So this is where you would export a certain category, put it into a Moodle XML file, give that to another instructor. They would then import that into their course. So you can do that from course to course, or you can do it from instructor to instructor. You just give them that file on a stick or email it to them, and then they can import it that way. So. And then when I was talking about, oh yeah, let's leave this page. If you had made a quiz and you had realized, oh, I want to keep all the settings the same, but I need to change the questions, and you've decided to basically, you can't edit it because a student has attempted it, but you want to edit it for the next round of students, you can duplicate it. So here is that duplicate function. It would then give you, in the duplicated one, you could then change the questions for the next. So if you did have a student guinea pig it for you, and then you would duplicate it, if you decided to throw out a question or add a question, I would do that to then move forward rather than going back and trying to change the settings. Yeah. Okay, so that's quizzes and category banks. So again, really it's that kind of organizing the categories ahead of time. Try to do that as much as you can, and then once you've put them into your categories in your question bank, then it's just simply pulling them into the quiz itself. And there's lots of ways you can personalize it for how you want your students to get feedback from the quizzes. All right, so I will send you the PowerPoint. And then I also have kind of step-by-step instructions of all the things that we talked about with the settings and the editing and the overrides and importing questions. I will send you those with links as well. Okay, well, thanks for coming. I apologize for being a little late today. And yeah, and please let us know if you ever have any questions. We definitely can help you out.
Could I get clarification on one thing?
Sure. Let me just...
I know that